Hi everyone, I hope I'm audible and visible to all of you. Keshav, maybe you can just give me a yes. Awesome. Just give me a second. Hi everyone, and welcome to today's session. Good morning. And what we're going to talk about today is tokenizing book copyrights on the blockchain, the copyright licenses. So, naturally, the first thing that I'd like to start with is a very simple concept that how do books actually make money? So maybe if some of you have an idea, you could put your answer in a comment here. Like basic question, right? I'm going to write a book. I'm going to be an author. How am I going to get paid for this? Who is going to pay me and why are they going to pay me for it? So the basic concept is something called a copyright. So let's take an example. So this is one of the books that I've written. It's called, say, Cybercrime Investigation Manual. Now, when I write this book, it's original, right? So I've written it based upon concepts and ideas that I have in my head. The first thing we've got to remember is a concept is not protected by copyright law. So just because I have an idea, I do not get any legal protection for the idea per se. But when I express that idea in a physical form, for example, on a piece of paper, or I type it into a computer, and I make a book out of it, then the law grants me something called a copyright, which means I can now control who can and cannot do certain things in relation to that book that I have created. Now, one question I'd like to tackle here is it compulsory to register a copyright? Most of the world, the answer is no. Most of the countries of the world are party to something called the Berne Convention, and under that, simply by expressing your idea, say in a book, you automatically get copyright protection. But how are you going to prove this in a court of law? Tomorrow somebody copies your book. How are you going to prove it's actually yours? That's why it is always recommended that you submit this book or document to the government authority. They are then going to verify certain things and they will grant you a registration that you are the one who first applied for copyright in this, and a copyright is given to you. Now we can go about granting different licenses or rights to other people. So let's take a simple example of the Harry Potter books, right? So probably the author who made the most amount of money ever in the world was the lady who wrote Harry Potter. Now, when she wrote this book and she got the copyright, she now could monetize this in many different methods. How does she do that? By giving people different kinds of licenses. So, the first license that she would give is this is my content. I am giving the publisher the right to publish and distribute physical copies of the book. So we call this the print publishing rights. And she gives it to X publisher. And they can now start doing that. And every time a book is sold, a part of that money goes to her. So we usually call that as a royalty payment. So one option is you get paid upfront. Second option is you get paid royalty per book, or ideally it's both. You get some money upfront and you get some money every time a book is sold. Then we have e-book rights, which basically means this physical book can be converted to a digital book or an e-book, and then that can be sold, for example, on Amazon or any other such kind of platform. Again, the author keeps getting some money out of it. So this now becomes license number two. First license, print and publish in physical. Second license, print and publish as an ebook. Third could be an audio book. So, nowadays a lot of people prefer that instead of reading the book, they want to hear the book. So, if you want to convert this to audio, again, the author needs to give you the permission to do that. By the way, if you guys have questions, keep putting them in the comments. I'll keep taking them. Then we have something called the adaptation right. Suppose you want to make a movie out of it. So, as we know in the Harry Potter series, movies were made out of the book, TV shows were made, even a stage play could be made. Again, you need adaptation right from the author. Then, translation right. So, the Harry Potter series here again was translated into 100 plus languages. Every time you make a translation, the author has to give you the permission to do that. And every time you sell the translated version, for every copy, the author also gets some money. Then we have merchandising rights. So, for example, you could make dolls or action figures or toys out of the characters or the concepts in the book. Again, that is called as a merchandising right. And again, the author needs to give you the permission. Then we have educational rights. So that would be ideally in my case. So when I write books like this, I want them to be used by different colleges, universities around the book to teach their students. So I could give them an educational right that you can use it only for educational purposes. So you can't commercially sell my book, but you can use it for education. So we call that an educational right or license. Then we've spoken about digital distribution, graphic novels. So another interesting concept nowadays. So for example, you may have heard about this book called Sapiens. Now, honestly, I wanted to read it, but it was way too thick, and I kind of didn't have the patience to. So I went through the graphic novel version of it. So that's the interesting part here. The author also realized that a lot of people would find it difficult, so he came out with a graphical novel, which means what we also used to call as comics as kids. But that's a separate right that needs to be given. You can't just take somebody else's novel and then translate it into a graphical version. Again, that's a license you need to get. Interactive media rights. So suppose you want to make video games. So there are certain movies which get converted to video games, books which get converted to video games. Interactive media right or a license comes in. There are a few more like online streaming, syndication. So I don't know if you've noticed, but many times in newspapers, they publish small strips from a comic. So for example, if you look at Tintin, what they could do is every day they would publish, let's say, these three, uh, you know, columns here. So they would do these three, then next day, the next three. And like this, step by step, the entire comic would be published in that newspaper over a period of time, maybe a month or even more. They usually do this with, you may have seen at one time, Dennis the Menace was a very popular character, or Calvin and Hobbes, and so many of these others. So those are called syndication rights, that a magazine or a newspaper can publish your content over a period of time. Then you have compilation where you can take multiple things and compile it together. You can broadcast it even on the radio, for example. Then there are also theatrical rights and virtual reality rights. So these are all the different ways in which an author can monetize his or her creation. Any questions so far? Is the concept clear to all of you? Now that we've understood that as an author, what are the kind of rights I have, now comes the concept of why do we want to bring the blockchain into this? Why do we want to really tokenize this? And there are several reasons and benefits that authors are now beginning to do that. The first thing would be, as of today, when I write something, I have the rights. I can then sell it to one publisher. Now I need to go and find other people for different things like translating my book into languages, or making a movie out of it, or whatever. Now imagine if I could sell these rights to a large number of people. So just like the way a company lists its shares in the stock market and many people can become owners, I can make many people owners of my copyright. Now, copyright lasts for a very long time. So, depending upon the country, on an average, it is 60 years after the death of the author, which means, let's say an author has written a book, and as long as the author is alive, the copyright is with him. After the author dies, for 60 more years, the copyright remains with whoever the author has given the rights to. So, in the will, he may have said, okay, my rights in these books go to so and so person. Like Albert Einstein gave the rights to all his books to a university, I think in Vienna, if I'm not mistaken. Now, for 60 years after Albert Einstein's death, the copyright lies with that university and they can make money from it. After that period of 60 years is over, the book enters into what we call as the public domain. For example, if you look at the works of Shakespeare, now William Shakespeare passed away a very long time ago, which means today we do not need any permission to do whatever we want with his content. So people can create movies out of it. People can publish the plays the way he has written it. People can act out the plays. No permission is needed, no money needs to be given. So copyright is for a limited period, but the period is pretty long. Now imagine if I could give these rights or share the copyright with hundreds or thousands of people. So it benefits me as an author that on day one I can get money from them, and it benefits other people because for the next 60 to 100 years, they can also make money from my creation. If we use the blockchain and we use smart contracts, this royalty distribution becomes very streamlined. Otherwise, try to imagine hundreds of different people may have taken hundreds of copyright licenses from you. Now, every day, how are you going to monitor whether you are actually getting all your money or not? That is where blockchain smart contracts would really come in. Fractional ownership means people kind of become like shareholders in your copyright. Then it becomes very easy. The liquidity goes up, which means buying and selling of this becomes easy. Otherwise, it's not easy. You take my word for it. I've written a lot of books in my life. Making money from your books takes a lot of effort. And it becomes so much easier when people can simply buy and sell licenses of my book like the way they do it in a stock market. So liquidity really goes up. All the transactions that have happened in the past, anybody can see them. And another very interesting thing is, as an author, I can directly connect to all my readers wherever in the world they are. I can connect to potential investors directly. So in every book, I could just simply have a QR code, scan this if you want to say own part of the copyright. People can then directly connect to me, give me feedback so that my books can also improve in future. Plus, they become stakeholders. People who like the book can now own a part of the copyright in the book also. Then I believe that this can become a very good part of your investment portfolio. After all, people invest in a lot of things. We invest in mutual funds, gold, silver, fixed deposits. Now imagine if we could add copyright as one of those assets. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to talk about other copyrights also. For example, in movies, in music, even in software. But today we'll focus on books. But I believe adding book copyright licenses as part of your portfolio could be really good because the returns can be very high and they can be over a sustained period like 50, 60 years. The legal process also gets a lot easier when we start to use the blockchain. Now, of course, if any of you listening to me or later when you have a look at this video, if you are an author or you're a publisher and you want to understand how to tokenize your book on the blockchain, definitely get in touch with me. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or any of the other social media platforms or even on WhatsApp. And I'd guide you through about how you can do this. Now, I'd like to know if you guys have any questions. I hope over the last few minutes you understood the basic concept. If there are any questions, we can have them now. If not, I'll take up other questions around generally blockchain related or hi-fi related. So I'll give you guys a minute or two. Do let me know if you have any questions. So one question is about the duration. So like I explained earlier, the duration is life of the author plus 60 years after the death of the author. During that period, the copyright is still there and you can monetize it, or your next of kin or whoever you've given the rights can monetize it. After that, it becomes in the public domain, which means anybody in the world can do whatever they want. Nobody can really stop. Uh, what are the regulations around tokenization in use? So that's an interesting question. Now, when we talk about regulations, I'm presuming you're talking about regulating or tokenizing copyright because for every asset, the regulations are going to change. So when we talk specifically about regulations globally for tokenizing copyright, there is nothing special. As in, there is no separate law needed. As a copyright holder, you can distribute these licenses which are covered by the copyright law. So globally, like I told you, most countries come under the Berne Convention. So more or less the same kind of copyright laws are followed. As an author, you have exclusive rights to give out as many licenses as you want. Licenses need not be permanent. So let me give you an example. Let's say you make a TV show and you give rights to say a Netflix to broadcast your show. It doesn't mean it's a lifelong right. You can say 3 months right. Similarly, in your books, you can give fixed duration rights and you can tokenize any of the licenses. There are no special regulations which are needed. Can you please share the process of tokenizing the books, like technical steps? Sure. So let me just quickly walk you through them. So the first step that we need, so suppose you approach us and say, I want to tokenize this book. The first thing we're going to do is copyright authentication. So we are going to confirm the legitimacy of the copyright. So we will check the documents, cross-verify with the government. It's all verifiable online. Then we make sure, okay, the copyright is registered to the author. The next step is to do a digital identity creation where we assign a unique digital ID to that license. Because in each book, you could have 30, 40 licenses. So each of those licenses needs to have its own ID number. Then we store this information on the blockchain. So we call it as the immutable recording. So as you know, on the blockchain, when we put data, it's provably immutable, which means you can actually prove in a court of law that the data has not been tampered. Every node of the blockchain will have that exact same data. And because of the blockchain consensus mechanism and the hash function, it's provable that the data has not been tampered. Now, these three steps come under first stage, which is called digital verification of the copyright license. Then we go to stage two, where we document the licensing history. So suppose this book is something which has been made in the past, and already you've given out some licenses. We need to bring all those license agreement on the blockchain. So we call this the digitized licensing of the records. So all the past and current licensing agreements, including their terms, duration, parties involved, all that information we will bring onto the chain. Then we will do integration with the token. So we will link this history along with the digital token of your copyright license. This will ensure the transparency and the ease of verification. Then we go on to the next stage, which is fractional licensing. So we will enable multiple people to own the license. So suppose it is a license to translate your book into Spanish. That license 100 different people can own. So the token technologically has to be developed in such a way that multiple people can hold it. So each license is not going to be an NFT. So that's a common misconception that a lot of people have. What they do is they translate the entire book into one NFT. That's not the right approach. The right approach is break the book down into multiple licenses, and for each license we issue a fungible token. So suppose for my book, I am giving a license to translate this into Spanish. That's a fungible token which can be broken into 100, 200, 500 fractions. I could have another token for translating that book into Mandarin or into Hindi. Each of these separate licenses has its own token which is fungible, so that it can be fractionalized and people can very easily invest in it by putting small amounts of money also. Once we've done this, we then issue the token. So we distribute the tokens from the marketplace, of course, having made sure that the legal compliance is all done. Now, for this, what the way I recommend is multiple marketplaces can handle this. So when it's running from the blockchain, there can be hundreds of markets around the world which connect to that chain, and in real time, they are able to display that information. And then people can do peer to peer transactions. And then, of course, the whole thing dynamically, all the licenses are managed. And finally, we also need to think about the redemption and rights execution. So suppose somebody has bought out 100% of a particular license and they want to now remove this from the blockchain, they should have the permission to do that. So somebody can come to you and say, I've bought out the entire 100% Spanish right. Now that is not to be made available to anyone else. In that case, all those tokens can then be sent to the burn address. The person's license can now move offline if they want in a paper form, and then they can exit the system. So that option also should be available. Let me see what other questions you have. Okay. Do you need to have copyright first before tokenizing? Yeah, that's a very good question. And yes, definitely we need that first. Because if you do not have the copyright, you do not have the legal right to issue these licenses. And naturally, then you cannot even sell those licenses. So yes, I would say if someone is still writing the book, I wouldn't feel very comfortable investing in it unless that author has written a lot of books in the past and I know for sure the author will produce the book on time. Otherwise, ideally, I would recommend if you are tokenizing or investing in copyright tokens, make sure the book is ready and the copyright has been filed with the government so that legally, at least, everything is in the clear. How do you see the effect of tokenized copyrights with ChatGPT? Yeah, that's a very good question. Now, I'll be very honest with you. I would say, if you look back in the past, there was a time when authors had to write everything with their hand, with a pen and a paper. Then came in typewriters, printing presses. Then came computers and Word and so many other programs which made it easier. Now, all of these were simply tools to make it easier for an author to publish or to write. ChatGPT kind of changes the game because it can generate content for you. So naturally, the first question that comes that if you have used ChatGPT entirely to write a book, do you even have copyright over it? Now that is something courts in different countries are kind of debating about. I would say it's a tough question to answer. I would say if a book is 100% written by ChatGPT, then as an author, you don't really have the copyright on it. But let's see what the courts say. So that is definitely going to be an impact. Today, the way it happens, and I'll be honest, all of us authors, We use ChatGPT for certain parts of it and we declare it. So even if you look at some of my latest books, if I have used ChatGPT, there's a particular way in which we declare it. That okay, for ease of communication, we fed certain information to ChatGPT, and then whatever it generated, I edited it or made relevant changes. A little bit of it is not a problem at all. So while there is no fixed percentage, I would say 5 to 10% of the book, if it is generated by AI, it doesn't make much of a difference. Anything more, and yeah, I would begin to have doubts about how it will stand up in a court of law. So that's a good question, Adrian. And like I said, I don't have a 100% answer to it, but a small amount of it would work. Uh, Balasubramanian's question is, I hope this is done in HYFI blockchain, whether it is public. So HYFI is a public blockchain, a permissioned public blockchain. So yes, it is available in HYFI. Another question, what layer does HYFI blockchain consist of? Is it level 3? So it's a level 1. It's an L1 blockchain. So for those of you who are new to the concept, a blockchain is considered layer 1 if consensus is handled and everything is transactions are handled by itself. So we call it a layer 1 like Ethereum or Bitcoin or HYFI. A layer 2 like Polygon exists on top of the layer 1 and it doesn't handle the consensus on its own. It comes in for scalability, for reducing the transaction fee. So what Polygon does to Ethereum, that's what we call as layer 2. HYFI is layer 1. What if we feed content and thoughts to ChatGPT and use it for language improvement? Like I said, that's a very good point. So if you, let's say, let's take an example that your English is not very good. So you have your concept in not so good English and you feed it into ChatGPT and it improves the language for you. According to me, you should still have copyright over it. Now, honestly, unless somebody takes you to court, nobody really cares about the copyright issue here. As long as people find what you've written useful, they're probably going to pay the money and buy your book or whatever that is. But there's no 100% accurate answer on this. I have another point here. Suppose I've written a book in English and then I use an AI translation service to translate my entire English book, say, into Hindi. Now, in this case, there is no doubt 100% of the copyright is mine because translation rights or translation licenses are a recognized form when I own the copyright on something. The doubts begin when the original book itself is generated by AI. That is when there could be small amounts of doubt. But if the original book is mine, translation and all, I can definitely use AI. There is absolutely no problem. Another question from Adrian. What if someone is creating an intelligent application based on generative AI, based on copyright information from articles or books? Now, that's a very good point. And in fact, that's a current problem which even OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, are facing, where they are actually being sued by people saying that when you generated ChatGPT, the knowledge that you fed it, a lot of it is based on our content, but you didn't take our permission. You didn't pay us for it. Now, I'd like to compare this to when Google was fairly new and they started showing up so many things in their search result. A lot of people actually at that time sued Google saying, how can you use our content in your search results? And over a period of time, I think Google was able to win most of those cases because they said we are simply a search engine. We are not copying your content. We are making your content easily available to the end users. Now, when it comes to ChatGPT, it's very tough to say which way the courts are going to rule in this. But yes, many publishers have already filed a case against ChatGPT, and many of them are figuring out ways to block ChatGPT from accessing their content. Uh, Planning tokenization of gold mine in Australia. Okay, and I've chosen to launch on Uniswap. We see as a fastest and simplest way to launch. Well, so I'll be very honest with you, Michael, on this. You can do it on any platform. What is more important is the legal compliances. Because when we are talking about commodities like gold or precious metals like antimony, as you're mentioning here, what we've got to understand is there are securities regulators already. And as of today, when we look at commodities or precious metals, they already come under the commodities regulators. It's already happening in exchanges licensed and regulated by them. Now, the moment you move it onto the blockchain, the first problem you're going to hit is, do you have the regulatory approvals? If not, I would say get that first. After that, whether you decide to go with a DEX or a centralized exchange, that's not going to take much time. A centralized exchange also not going to take you more than a week. But I would say in your case, you are likely to hit regulatory issues because of the stuff that you are tokenizing. What kind of programming language, testnet, wallet for tokenizing in HYFI blockchain like Solidity, MetaMask? Okay, that's a very good question. So HYFI is actually based upon multi-chain, which is a fork of Bitcoin. So because of that, we are not an EVM compatible chain. So you cannot use things like MetaMask. However, we are solving that issue using the concept called as the wrapped tokens. Let me briefly tell you. So you all know Bitcoin is has its own chain. Ethereum is a separate chain. Bitcoin cannot run on Ethereum because Bitcoin is obviously not EVM compatible. Bitcoin is the original chain. So there is a very interesting concept called WBTC, a wrapped Bitcoin, which is an ERC20 token. A certain amount of Bitcoin is locked on the Bitcoin chain, and an identical amount is issued as WBTC on the Ethereum chain. So somebody who wants to use Bitcoin on Ethereum can do it using WBTC. So that's a very interesting way in which they solve that problem, and it's been running very successfully for many years now. So similar to WBTC, we've got options for wrapped tokens on HYFI. So if an author has issued, say, tokens of the copyright of his book on HYFI, but now somebody also wants to hold it on MetaMask, so the author has the right to then issue the wrapped version of that copyright token on any EVM compatible chain. So that's quite easy to do. So that's how we've taken care of that problem. I hope that answers your question. That was a good question, by the way. Let me take Bernard's question. To utilize ChatGPT, kindly ensure to include a mention of it in the contract as well as your copyright page. As an author, I don't think AI can fully replace my work. Maybe it can assist in certain parts, but writing a complete book is very doubtful. I believe AI should be categorized under the ghostwriter category. Sure, that's a very good point. So, in fact, many of you may not know what a ghostwriter is. Sometimes, let's say you want to write a book, you have the information, maybe it's based on your experiences, but you're not an expert in writing. So you can hire someone called a ghostwriter. They are experts in writing. They communicate with you, understand what you're trying to say. They write the book, but it's published under your name. The ghostwriter's name doesn't even come, they just get paid for it. So yeah, that's a very good point, Bernard, where we could even consider ChatGPT to be a ghostwriter. Sure, that's an interesting way to look at it. Michael's question: how does tokenization affect future equity raising, debt programs, and possible IPO, especially when it comes to mining? That's a very good point, Michael. So, I'm going to be doing a session on this very soon, which is called Tokenizing Private Equity. In that, we're going to talk about how unlisted startups can issue their shares on the blockchain, and definitely we wouldn't call it an IPO because that's an initial public offer, which means it has to be approved by the regulator. However, you could still do this at the venture capital or the private investing stage. So I'm definitely going to be doing a session on that very soon, Michael, and you'll get answers in that session. Another question is, but I've heard somewhere that WBTC is a bit centralized. So that's a very good question. Now, I will be very honest with you. This whole centralized, decentralized, it's a theoretical debate. Even Bitcoin can be considered quite centralized because you and I are not actually running nodes and mining. Actually, more than 50% of Bitcoin mining is controlled by 6 mining pools. Same is the case of staking in Ethereum or Binance. Nothing is 100% decentralized. The world doesn't work like that. Imagine if everybody in the world had to do Bitcoin mining, everybody would need to run their own nodes. And that's not really practical. It's complicated and it's expensive. So, yes, definitely WBTC is a little centralized. And I'm not such a big fan of decentralization anyway because it is very difficult to do legal compliance when everything is decentralized. You don't even know who you're dealing with anymore. How will you do your KYC or your anti money laundering or your CFT, data privacy? So many laws are there which we need to comply with. Now, when we talk about tokenization, you have to forget decentralization. It is going to get centralized to a great extent because everything we do has to be legally clear. The reason the stock markets are so successful is because there is a regulator in place so you can trust it. Similarly, when it comes to tokenization, there is bound to be an element of centralization because somebody has to hold the asset. There has to be a custodian in place. Like somebody wants to tokenize gold, but who is holding the gold? If the gold is not held with a trusted custodian, how are you going to trust what you're holding? This doesn't apply to a Bitcoin because in Bitcoin there is no external asset. The Bitcoin in the blockchain is the asset itself, so you don't need a custodian. But when we look at ETFs, which have now come, Bitcoin ETF, exchange traded fund, of course, they're completely centralized. They have to be run by regulated financial institutions. So I hope that answers your question. So another interesting question. I'm in the process of launching my book. Can we connect later? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Please email me on rohasnagpal@gmail.com or drop me a message on any of the social media platforms and I'll help you out. Michael's question is looking forward to it. Okay. Another question is I'm an engineer turned lawyer and my niche practice area is tech law. Blockchain law is one of the areas where I need experience. Is there a possibility I can intern with your team? Sure, why don't you email us your resume and we'll have a look at it and definitely get back to you on that. Are there any other questions that you have? So to kind of summarize, I explained to you what copyright is, the 10, 15 different types of copyright licenses in books, and then we moved into the stages or the steps to actually tokenize the copyright license. I hope you guys found this useful. And I've also authored the tokenization playbook 2024. So do feel free to download that and read it. And I've explained the copyright tokenization of books also in great detail in that book. I'll give you guys another minute or so. If there are no questions, then I'll see you next Friday at the same time. I'll wait for another minute or so. If you have questions, please feel free to put them here. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed the session. See you next week. Bye bye.